today we're going to be talking about psychosocial ergonomics, which is it's an up topic right now with the whole mental health, and this is kind of how ergonomics is incorporated into that mental component of work. So just a brief presentation overview. We're going to go through what psychosocial ergonomics actually is, some of the risk factors, look at statistics, our workplace implications, some legislation, and how musculoskeletal disorders ties in there, some literature that looks at it and shows that actually these factors do contribute to the musculoskeletal disorders, look at prevention, assessing, and interventions, and then how we can incorporate that into your health and safety programs at work. So when we think of ergonomic risk factors, we're typically thinking of those physical risk factors. I'm sure everybody has been heard of force, posture, repetition, contact stress, vibration. That's typically what we think of when we hear the term ergonomics. We also think of different individual risk factors that may contribute to musculoskeletal disorders as well. And these are things like our poor work practices, any type of bad habits that we might have, our fitness level, poor health habits in general, and those in combination with ergonomic risk factors of force, posture, repetition, all can contribute to musculoskeletal disorders. But on the other side over here, okay, perfect. The arrow didn't quite pull it, but that's fine. We have the psychosocial risk factors, there it goes, that contribute to musculoskeletal disorders as well. And these are the things like work pace, autonomy, monotony, our task demands, how much support we feel by the organization and by our family outside of work, our work-rest cycles, and any job uncertainty that we might have. So what are is this on? Okay, it's on now? Okay. So what are psychosocial ergonomics? It's the non-physical aspects of work. So it's something that's derived by the culture, the policies, the social attitude of the organization. And it's the way that we interact with these job demands in the work environment. So we have a stimulus response and an outcome. And the one thing about psychosocial ergonomics and stress in general is how individuals react to it is completely different. Some people thrive under high stress situations and can perform really well. Other people just kind of crumble. So there's a huge individual factor to this. So the worker's actual perceptions of the demand can deal with it, or they can't deal with it, will dictate if they experience stress or not. Sorry, I keep on hearing myself go in and out of being on the microphone, so it's throwing me off. But so there's three areas to consider when we're looking at psychosocial ergonomics. We're looking at the factors that are actually associated with work in the job environment. We're looking at those factors outside of work, because just because we come to work doesn't mean what's going on outside life, home, health issues, doesn't come into work. So you still have those stress from, whether you're carrying, your kids create stress. There's a lot of people now that are in that demographic that are actually caring for their parents and going to work, and that's creating stress. So you have, potentially stress at work, and then you have stress from life in general, and that's still there. And then we also have our own personal characteristics of how we deal with stress. So, your gender and intelligence comes into play here, your social class, education, and your actual personality and attitude into how you interpret stress. So some examples of psychosocial work factors when we're looking specifically at work are job demands. So we're looking here at time pressures, what the workload is, our rest break cycle. The job control. So do we have participation, or do we don't have any control of the job that we're doing? Do we have input or an influence on the work that's being done and on the outcomes that occur? And job satisfaction. Is what we're doing really monotonous, repetitive? We don't feel like our skills are being really utilized? Or are we able to have a lot of variety and say in our job and develop different things? Our support. Do we feel supported not only by the organization that you're working for, but also supported, again, by your family being there? Because a lot of us, we put a lot of hours into work, and if you feel even more intense pressure, if you're there and your family wants you to be home. So this is just kind of showing more of in a diagram schematic way, everything that is contributing to psychological injuries while at work. So again, you have poor support, of increased demands and lack of control. low recognition levels, you don't feel like the environment's fair. All of these types of things can contribute to having some type of psychological injury. And in the diagram over here, you have that management's capability to support you at work, and if they don't, and the likelihood of potentially developing some sort of mental illness at work. Now just to go through some statistics, because I found the statistics on stress and stress actually related to work are kind of alarming. This chart here is from the Canadian Community Health Survey, and what it looks at is the percentage that we find ourselves quite a bit stressed. And it's not related to the work, this is just stress in general. And it looked at different demographics as far as men and women in different age categories. And you can see that ages 35 to 44 and 45 to 54 for both females and males are the most stressful time. And when you think back to those times, I'm in one of those demographics, and I'm like, well, my kids, like all the commitments that you're to finish work, you're thinking, well, I've got to get them here to this activity, like you're running in all these different directions. But on the flip side, you have the 45 to 54, and I think this comes into play, if I'm nearing the end of my career, have I reached the potential I want to get? Are you putting more stress on yourself because this isn't where I thought I should be? And the whole caring for parents at that time. But now you're not having children, but now you have your parents to care for as well. So those are the most stressful years. And at first I was like, why are these the most stressful? Then when you really think about it, there's a lot going on in those 2 decades. So statistics, when they actually looked at working adults, they found that 1/4 of working adults actually say it's the job, like it's work is what's stressing them out. And they dictate that they're typically highly stressed. So 3.7 million working adults feel high stress levels. 46% say they are just a bit stressed. And 6 in 10 highly stressed workers identify work actually as their main source of stress. 3/4 of employees believe that workers now have more on-job stress than a generation ago. And when you think of that, I like almost to think that it's technology that's doing this to us. Technology is great, but we're never disconnected. So, you used to be able to leave work at work. We're not leaving work at work now. We have our phones, so we're checking our emails, we're checking texts, it just never really ends. So that complete disconnect, we almost don't have it anymore. And this is just showing here of that survey, showing that 62% of working adults said work was their most stressful aspect of their life, where only 12% said finances, again 12% said time, 8% family, and 6% personal. Sorry, it's not clicking forward. Oh, here we go. So John spoke to this point as well, is that it's costing Canadians $50 billion a year in healthcare, lost time, and work disruptions. And of that $50 billion, actually $20 billion is the result of work-related causes. So we need to do better. We need to have more support within the workplace, and it can make a huge difference on the mental health of our workers. Again, 47% of Canadians consider their work to be the most stressful part of the day. We touched on that. And typically that affects mid-career workers the most, and it's lowering the productivity of our Canadian workforce. If you think of going to work and you're stressed out, there's so many things that it's affecting. Your output, your quality of work just really isn't there. You're not really even able to effectively deal with the demands being placed upon you. 23% of Canadian workers also, they don't feel only 23 feel comfortable going to their employers. So that means there's a lot of people sitting there not saying anything. And I don't know if it's a mentality that we feel like if we go to our employer and we admit that we can't, the demands placed on us, we can't handle it, then we're saying we can't do our job. But that's not necessarily it, but I think that's the stigma associated with mental health in general. Now, looking more closely at the demographics, I found it interesting. This one looked at just stress in general, not stress related to work, and they found that if people that report more stress are typically in a management, professional or clerical occupations, they have children, they're divorced or in a common law relationship, they're self-employed, they earn less than 40 or more than 80, but when we looked at people that were stressed, level of education and sex had no predictor. However, when we looked at the demographics, those that reported work as their main source of stress, we found that 55% of them are men, 43 were from the ages of 35 to 49, which is right in that area that we said. 3/4 typically live in a metropolitan area. 43% live with spouse and kids. They typically have a household income over $100,000, and 3/4 have a college or university degree. So this almost alludes to people that are kind of in a, a top-end position and the stress placed on them when we look at people that report work. Now looking kind of the Americans had some interesting statistics that I wanted to share as well. We had a lot in Canada as well, but I thought these were worth noting. Job stress is one of the major sources of stress for American adults, and the levels of stress are associated with having little control of your job but high demands, which is similar for here. If you don't feel like you have control but the demands keep on getting placed on you, your level of stress is going to increase. We have a difficult determining the stressful jobs because it depends on the person and the environment. Again, it's that whole individual, if you're going to thrive or you're just going to crumble under stress. So an example that they gave was a police officer actually experiencing more stress doing paperwork than they would pursuing a criminal. Because when you think of it, that's what they're trained for, is pursuing criminals, and that's their comfort. As silly as it may sound, for them it completely relates. Sitting down by a computer and doing typing or anything, that's not what they signed up for, really. And I'm sure now they have to do more and more of it than they did before. So you probably see stress under some of the older workers having to deal with technology more so now. So 19% of individuals have quit a previous position because of job stress. I mean, just think of yourselves. I know I can definitely say I fit into this percentage. I was in one of those positions that people kept on getting eliminated. I was there, but they weren't replacing it. So again, the demands of my job went up, and I had no control over it. And so you want to get out of that kind of environment, and that definitely happened to me in a previous role. Not OCal, though. I told them I'm here to stay. It's a great place. 12% of employees actually have called in sick because of stress. Over half American employees spend 12 hours a day or more on work-related issues. And again, I think this is completely a result of technology. We are just never disconnected. 62% find that at the end of the day, we can have work-related neck pain. 44% reported their eyes being stressed out. I mean, think of how often we're looking at screens in general. It seems to be predominantly part of a lot of people's job is to sit there and, do some type of inputting. And 38% complained of their hands hurting. 34 reported difficulty sleeping because they were too stressed out. I mean, if you're working 12 hours a day, you're never really shut off, so even when you go to sleep, you're probably still thinking of what you're going to do the next day because of the email you just received but you don't want to reply to, maybe. So what are the workplace implications as a result? I see people smirking. I feel like I'm giving examples that's completely like dictating their lives or what's happening. So we get a decrease in productivity from our employees because our absentee level has increased. We have reduced work output. They had the American AIS had a survey, and they said out of 800,000 workers from 300 companies, the number of sick calls actually due to stress has tripled between 1996 and 2000. I was trying to get a more current statistic for Canadians, but I mean, I think you can only assume that this has probably increased. We get a decrease in the quality of work that employees are putting out. We get an increase in the injuries, which ultimately is going to increase our WSIB cost. And we get a decrease in employee morale. So what's our legislation saying about this? John spoke to this about as well, but we've had changes in our legislation now. We have Bill 127, the Stronger Healthier Ontario Act, Schedule 33, Workplace Safety Insurance Act, and now they're allowing benefits to chronic mental health, not just traumatic mental health, and this just came into effect January of this year. I'm not sure if anybody has had a chance to look at it and what the difference between they are. I'm just going to kind of touch upon it a little bit. But traumatic mental stress has been covered for quite some time now. An example of this would just be a grocery store clerk goes in and he's held up at gunpoint. Where on the flip side, chronic mental stress is the grocery store clerk is subjected to humiliating jokes, demeaning conduct, personal criticism by coworkers over several years. So this chronic mental stress is caused by substantial work-related stresses or stressors. It's considered to be substantial if it's excessive in intensity and duration, if the pressures are exceeding what's normal. And examples would be harassment, bullying, or persistent criticism, where things such as terminations, demotions, changing in working hours, or productivity changes, those do not constitute chronic stress. We also have the CSA standard Z1003-13. I have in blue there is, at one time there was a free download, I think. Is it still free? Yeah, John's saying it's still free. So you can actually download this standard for free and print it out, which, I mean, we just got the new CSA Office Ergonomic standard, and just to give you an idea, they cost about $500. So if you can get this one for free, might as well download it. So what this standard now is saying is it's including psychosocial hazards as part of hazards in the workplace. So what you need to do is you need to assess, you need to evaluate, you need to check, you need to have this ongoing process for psychosocial hazards at the workplace. And this is just showing these strategic pillars there and the visions and, you know, making a business case as far as risk management, cost effectiveness, and list out the prevention, promotion, and resolutions. This is included in that standard as well. And again, there's this new CSA Office standard. I don't know if anyone's been able to take a look at this, but it actually is, it's quite interesting, and it provides literally standards now for your chairs, your furniture, everything within an office environment. And what it is now, it's a standard, it's not a guideline. So standards are enforceable. The MOL goes back to standards and typically enforces what the CSA standards are. So this is a great step forward for us ergonomists to see these office ergonomic guidelines being changed over into standards. But in this new office ergonomic standard, it indicates psychosocial workplace factors and psychological health factors. So again, it lists them off. They're the same ones that we have been talking about, but it wants you to, again, within your health and safety programs at work, you need to act, plan, do, check. It's this continuous circle, just as if you had chemical, biological, or physical hazards. This is included in there now. So now, how are all these psychosocial hazards, how are they related to musculoskeletal disorders? We all know that stress can create a wide variety of responses in our body. You know, there's a lot of digestive, there's a lot of research on that, of what it can do, but it can also affect our musculoskeletal system. So some of the psychosocial demands that have created a positive, not a positive effect, but have just been shown to influence musculoskeletal disorders are the direct impact on the forces applied. We tend to, if we're stressed out, think of when you're gripping something. We tend to grip something a lot harder. If we're at the keyboard, we're pounding the keys. Those are a result of stress. We have increased muscle activation and tension, and we get this increased muscle tension, and we can't rest. We have it, which leads to an increase in fatigue. We have an increased sensitivity to pain because our central nervous system, and we decrease the frequency of breaks and micropauses because I think we think that we need to work through those breaks now. We don't take them because we need to get this workload done, where actually this is negatively impacting us. We have physiological changes that are going on, and we change our perception of the work situation. We may see a situation now as more threatening to us than being able to kind of deal with it. So we're going to go through some of the different responses of our body. So we have our behavioral response. This is taken by a person they are completely unaware of, and they perceive may help them cope with the stress that's placed upon them. So examples would be the individual avoids going to the workplace now because they're associating going to work with experiencing some kind of pain. The tasks become frustrating, and so this is when you start using more force to perform those tasks. And the psychological factors that cause negative stress may cause the workers now to develop sedentary and dependent lifestyles because now they're feeling pain at work, they go home, they can't do these extracurriculars. So it's a kind of a whole vicious circle. And we look at the psychological responses. This is how the individual actually perceives the stress. Do we see it as positive or negative? And in this case, we're obviously going to look at the negative. And these are feelings of uncertainty. We're disinterested. We are bored because, maybe the work isn't challenging us. We're feeling anxiety of even going into work. And we can directly relate them to lack of job control. So you have low control again, but excessive demands. We're not satisfied with work, and we don't feel the support system is there for us. Our physiological response from our body is that the changes people experience due to stress are intended to prepare a person to physically resolve that situation. So it's kind of that fight or flight response. So we have an increase in muscle tension, which can lead to pressures around our joints and ligaments, nerves. Again, we're causing this excessive force to be done, whether we're holding something, we're typing. And our body now, what's scary is it remains in this heightened sense of stress, and we become stuck in a stress mode. We're working harder, we're lifting more, but it's not necessarily good for our musculoskeletal system. We're doing it in the moment, but we're actually causing negative effects to our body. Also, with the physiological responses, there's certain things that occur unconsciously. The initial stages of a stress response, we have high levels of hormone production, we have energy release, we have tense muscles, and we have increased heart rate. What I found interesting when I was researching this was this psychophysiological explanation, which I'm not meaning to get sciencey here, but you have motor units that are turned on as soon as you start to do something. And we call it the Cinderella hypothesis, because just think these low threshold motor units are actually turned on first and they go off last. So Cinderella was the first one to get up and the last one to go to bed is kind of the relation they make there. And these motor units become exhausted, they become overloaded, and it leads to degenerative process and pain development. So when they looked at that, they found that actually this physical activation, so by actually doing something, you're lifting something, you're doing something, only accounted for 33% of the development of musculoskeletal disorders. So you actually physically doing the task didn't even account for half of musculoskeletal disorders. So what's the other percentage coming into play there? Well, we had Merlin and Lundeberg come along in 1997. They expanded upon this hypothesis, and then what they did is they included these psychosocial risk factors for musculoskeletal disorders. And they found that the motor units that were activated during our actual physical demands were the same ones that were activated during mental stress. So even stress was causing these motor units to be active. A study of German pension found that the relative risk of earlier retirement actually increased 67% for those who had both physical and psychosocial risk factors compared to those that just had physical risk factors only. This is just showing a diagram of this extended Cinderella hypothesis, and it's showing at the top you have your mental stressors. I should use he gave me the hot tip that I have a pointer. Nobody else got that yet, but so you have the mental stressors and you have the physical stressors up here, and you can see how they're both contributing to increase in muscle tension. But this also doesn't leave out here your factors that are coming from outside of work that are contributing to this as well, because we have to remember work places stress on us, but a home places stress on us as well. When we look at some of the research, too, that kind of looked at this hypothesis and wanted to, test it, they found they looked at 14 people and that they exposed to mental stress and physical demands. And what they did is they measured the muscle activity in the upper back, neck, and shoulders, and they did it with EMG. And they found that mental stress induced a significant increase in muscle activity and heart rate. So 12 out of 14 of these participants had one or more of these motor units I was talking about before still contracting at rest compared to when they were just physically doing something. So what they concluded is that lack of mental rest is a very important risk factor into the development of muscular pain. NIOSH looked at repetitive strain injuries of the upper extremities and the psychosocial risk factors that would contribute to them. And they found that intensified workload, monotonous work, low levels of social support, lack of control, and job dissatisfaction all contributed to upper extremity disorders. When looking at the back disorders, they found that intensified workload, so perceived pressure, increased workload, job dissatisfaction, and monotonous work had a relationship to developing these types of disorders. When I look more at occupations, they had some research there for the automobile repair garage, and they found that if you had low decision authority and low job control, it predicted neck pain and low back pain. Healthcare workers, if you had low job control, was found to put workers at more risk for low back disorders. And I mean, when you think of, healthcare workers, you don't really have control over the people coming in and what they have. So this seems to probably, the demands are high, the control is low in this environment. Looking at computer users, you have high mental load, increases muscle tension, and it causes, can have negative effects on a person's immune system. We have high work demands, which may have a direct impact on the forces applied. Again, you're sitting forward, when you think you're pounding the keys and you're doing a report, something. Brenda walked by my office and she said, Melissa, like you look at yourself right now. I was perched forward on my chair and I was doing that, like the angry typing, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. So we all kind of do those types of things in those stressful situations. So another study looked at the physical aspects and the psychosocial risk factors, and they studied delivery drivers, manual material handlers, technicians, customer service operators, and general office support. And what they did is they created 4 different exposures groups. So they had, your high physical, high psychosocial risk factors, low physical, low, and every variety of that in between. And what they concluded is that workers that were exposed to both high physical and high psychosocial risk factors were more likely to report symptoms of musculoskeletal disorders than if you only had high physical or high psychosocial. So after looking at all of that, we know that there's a relationship. It's there. These psychosocial risk factors definitely contribute to musculoskeletal disorders. So now what should we do as organizations that we know that they exist? Well, James and John pointed this out too. Everything we tend to act on these prevention levels. So you can prevent at the source, early detection, or assist those with problems after it's already happened. But again, we always want to be at the source. So this is what we're going to look at. We want that primary prevention. So how do you assess for psychosocial hazards? Well, you can use some things like checklists. It's important that we are able to identify these stressors in the workplace and propose an effective intervention. So one way to identify these risk factors is through something like a checklist that can list off factors that could be used in workplace conditions. You want to make sure these checklists are relevant to your work environment and address the issues that are at the forefront. You also have questionnaires, and again, we have the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire. It seems to be the one that's mostly widely accepted. It allows people to be anonymous. It allows you to have be confidential. And the good thing about it is it allows you to link exposures to different health effects. Again, we have the Mental Injury Toolkit, which this was developed by OCAL, and it's on the OCAL website for free download, and it provides it's a resource kit that it includes definitions, common causes of mental distress. There's links there for Stress Assess, the different web apps, and it provides reports and tells you how to use it. Again, John talked about this as well. It's just a kind of a picture. This is our Stress Assess app that has a variety of screening questions. And again, you can change some of these questions so they don't pinpoint certain individuals within the organization and kind of tailor it to your company. But you can use an app that's available for free download in the App Store. But again, the app is actually only for individual use only, and you can't do a survey for your entire workplace. You would have to go online to be able to do that. But it will provide your recommendations and improvements like you saw there on John's presentation. So what are effective interventions then? You need to be able to prioritize your stressors and have a focus for your intervention. So you need a purpose, you need a goal, and sometimes the easiest thing to do is attack that low-hanging fruit first. So if there's something that's a common, and it would be easy enough per se to, increase the morale in your workplace, well, go for that one first. It's showing initiative, it's showing that you actually care about the results of the survey, and sometimes it's all about perception as well. Participation. You need to have participation among everyone. You need that buy-in, so that way everyone's supporting it. It's a commitment among the entire organization. So you need systematic risk assessments. So assessing psychosocial hazards in the workplace, you need to identify these key stressors, and it needs to be cyclical. Just because you've attacked one, you've solved it, doesn't mean something else has came up. So it has to be, again, similar to physical, biological, chemical, all those types of hazards. You really need to incorporate this into it as well. Effective interventions have been, our models for intervention have a process model for planning interventions. So you have to actually sit down and figure out how you're going to do this. They need to be understandable, and they need to be representative of your workplace. They must be ongoing. Like I said before, just because you were able to resolve one type of stressor doesn't mean something else hasn't came up, or maybe something now has been brought to the forefront because you've been able to alleviate that one. It's an ongoing management system. You want to educate your employers. Education, it really is power. I think of, just going in and doing Ergonomics 101 with a lot of companies. Once you know, you're able to see it then. If you don't know, then you can't help. And so once you have the knowledge, it's, kind of your job to kind of go spread it. So interventions in general have been shown to be successful in suppressing psychosocial risk factors. Studies have found that supervisors' awareness of musculoskeletal disorders are linked to an actual decrease in pain amongst the employees. Participation in ergonomics training is associated with increased level of control and decrease in work disability. When you just, I think, you go and you do an ergonomic assessment, some people don't really realize the postures or how they're doing things is not right, or there's a better way to do them. So again, knowledge is power. So there's others have found that group-based interventions improve the individual's response to the work demands. So again, they'll have good postures, they have optimal workstation adjustments now. They lead to an increased use of our breaks. A lot of people think that working through breaks, they're going to be more productive. We're actually getting out on your break, getting that fresh air coming back. You win, it's a world of difference. And my colleagues at work, we typically, don't stay in at lunch. You get out, go for a walk, come back, clear your head, and you're actually very much more effective after having a sufficient break. They've led to also increase in use of software, less working hours without breaks, and you have increased perceived social support. So what are these workplace programs? So I'm sure everyone's heard of the Comprehensive Workplace Health and Safety Program. There's a lot of information on this. But the components of this include your occupational health and safety, psychosocial work environment needs to be included in there, your workplace health promotion, and organized community involvement. So again, you need to have the four components need to be overlapped and integrated with the system. To develop and maintain the program, you need continual improvement, and the process must lead. So you need to have management and leadership commitment. You need to be able to plan. You can't, have anything be effective if you don't have something planned. You need to actually implement it. You need to constantly check, and you need to act upon it. So workplace programs have shown to benefit the the workplace. They've shown that it has better engagement, morale, satisfaction, retention and recruitment of employees, and you have better productivity. It is shown to reduce absenteeism, grievances, health costs, medical leave and disability, and workplace injuries. For employers, you need to support your employees. You need to define their roles. You need to promote work-life balance. You need to encourage respectful behaviors at work. You need to manage workload. So, recognize when, you've probably put something on, just because this person always does it doesn't mean that it's not causing them some stress. You need to provide training and learning opportunities. You need to have conflict resolutions in place. And you need to recognize employees' contributions. Recognizing for a job well done really does a lot for the morale of employees. As employees, what can we do to help improve our mental fitness? You need to schedule some you time every day. Again, your lunch. Your lunch is supposed to be your lunch. So don't sit down on your lunch. Get up, get out, clear your head, reward yourself, play to your strengths, ask for and offer help. There's no shame in it at all. De-stress your diet, eating healthy, you eat good, you feel good. Press pause for downtime. Get regular physical activity. Set goals and stay on target. Practice relaxation techniques and get enough sleep. And choose to have a positive attitude. Negative attitudes really are contagious, just as positive attitudes are. So if we can all be a little bit more positive, it really does go to increase the morale amongst all the employees. And with that, I will take any questions.